This week when I was watching the World Cup, I noticed something that actually applies to both football and businesses. The key principle of that is the fans are screaming at the coaches or talking afterwards or putting videos online of I would have done this, I would have made that substitution, I would have ran that formation, um, I would have, doubled up on X person to have a better chance of winning or making the game easier. And when I see that, when I thought that, I said, there's actually some really good business points that come out of that. The first point is exactly that. Your front line, your employees, your customers, your players, they see what the managers or the coaches might not. It doesn't mean that they're right, but it doesn't also mean that they're wrong. They might say, for example, put Messi in instead of Fernandez. The manager might say, yeah, that's a great idea, but he might be, no, I need Fernandez in so that Messi can rest a little for the next game or the second half, whatever. I don't know too much about football. But, it got me thinking that when you go to the business side, you look at it and you say, my front line, my players are my employees. The fans are the customers. Now, my employees might say to me, this is a really, really good idea. Maybe we should try this. Maybe we could do that. Maybe we could do this. Now, the bad managers or the poor managers or the poor leaders, they might just shut it down and say, no, we can't. It does two things here. Firstly, it breaks down the confidence of the actual employee, and it doesn't let you try something new. Now, it might not be cost effective to do that, so that might be why the manager is saying no. But if you take it and you look at them and you say, that could work, that helps them as well. And that's the biggest thing, is you want your employees to have that confidence to come up with new ideas, because they are the ones, as people say, in the trenches. They're the ones that are doing the day-to-day tasks, the day-to-day work, and they will see the inefficiencies and what they think needs to change. And more often than not, they might actually be right. Take, for example, in my job here at maintenance, at the hotel I'm at, we were running outdated light bulbs. And when I say outdated, I mean they're from 2005. There's 20 some odd years of bulbs that are outdated. Not only does it cost more money to run them, they burn out more frequently, so it costs more to actually purchase them. They are very hard to get nowadays because they are discontinued, and it takes more time for your employees to consistently and constantly change those. So instead of doing that, I said, well, why don't we, or why can't we change them out to the proper bulbs nowadays, the newer ones? And they said, well, we can, but we just haven't. So I said, well, let's do that, because then it saves my time, saves the company money, and it saves the company's energy bill and electric bill. So, that's a prime example of how I saw something what a manager might not have. And the same goes for customers. They view your business from a completely different perspective than even an employee and the manager does. Take, for example, what I like to do when I go to a restaurant or a convenience store or something like that. I always try to think, what could I do if I owned this to make it better? How could I improve it? Now, it's not to say that it would work, but it's worth taking that time to think of. And that's why when you get feedback from customers, it's so, so important to listen to it and to think about it. It is free consultation. When a customer tells you something, it's free consultation. It might not work, and it might not be correct, and it might not be the direction you have your business going in, but it's still something to consider. That's the biggest word, that consider. Now, the other thing is, with all of that, is just because you get this feedback and you listen to them, it doesn't mean you need to agree with them. It's kind of what I've been saying. Just because they want Messi instead of Fernandez doesn't mean you have to do that. But it's worth considering. Again, when I went to my manager and said, hey, let's change these bulbs out, they listened to me. They didn't not agree with me, because we are doing that, but they said there is a bit of extra steps that are involved in it. They looked at it and they said, yeah, we have to do it, but we need to do some other things. So it wasn't just I was right, they were wrong type of scenario, but they listened and they provided feedback. And if you don't listen, the biggest thing that kind of happens is your employees don't want to speak up. They lose the confidence. They feel like they're not heard, and that's hard to regain. The biggest thing with that is, the biggest risk with that is not actually getting criticism. It's, again, the silence. Because if your employees don't feel heard, or your customers don't feel heard, they're gonna stop telling you what's going on. Now, you look at football and the coach might be like, oh, no one's saying anything, I must be doing an amazing job. And then you lose the game, or something else happens. That silence is no one thinking that you can take on what they're providing to you. Because, great managers, they are curious. They don't always ask, how do I do this? They don't always assume they know the answer. They stay curious and they ask you, what are your thoughts? What do you think we should do? How do you think we should overcome this? And there's two parts to that, because they might say, what do you think? And you give them a suggestion, and now we're not going to do that. That's the poor manager. The good manager says, what do you think? You say, we're going to, maybe this. And they say, that's a really good idea. Let's take that into consideration. Let's take that on board. Let's improve on it. Let's look into it a bit more. That's how the best leaders become great. That's how you improve as a leader and as a manager, as an owner. Now, saying all that, really enjoy watching the World Cup. My team's hopefully Argentina, but I like Messi. Anyways, if you enjoyed this and you actually want to learn a little bit more about how your business might have some areas of improvement, listening to customers, things of that sorts, I've actually created a couple PDFs there. They're linked in my bio. There's a free checklist that actually helps you just kind of visualize that. Anyways, thanks for watching. Go Argentina.